The word fraud didn't just echo in that courtroom, it detonated. And the blast radius? Straight to Prince Harry's credibility. Because in a case where he walked in demanding justice, demanding accountability, demanding the world believe he was the wounded truth teller fighting a corrupt press machine, a new witness just stood up under oath and flipped the entire story on its head. This wasn't tabloid chatter. This wasn't an anonymous source whispering over cocktails. This was sworn courtroom testimony delivered under penalty of perjury, claiming that Harry allegedly submitted false or manipulated evidence in his own lawsuit. Not a technical slip, not a paperwork error. Allegations of deliberate deception placed directly before a British judge. And suddenly, the prince who came to court as the victim looks a lot more like a man with something to hide. Let's be clear about why this is nuclear. Courts do not play games with evidence. If an ordinary person were accused of submitting forged or fraudulent material in a civil case, proceedings could be halted on the spot and the matter referred for criminal investigation. Careers have ended over less. People have gone to prison over less. The entire justice system runs on one fragile thing, that when you swear to tell the truth, you actually do. But here's where jaws really started tightening. Instead of dramatic gasps, emergency legal conferences, or immediate referrals to prosecutors, the case just kept moving, calmly, quietly, as if someone hadn't just accused a senior royal of trying to game the system. Legal observers watching the case reportedly described the atmosphere as surreal. Everyone in the room understood the weight of the allegation. Everyone knew what it would normally trigger. And yet the machine of justice barely flinched. That disconnect is what has people whispering that Harry should be shaken to his core. Because if this explodes properly, it doesn't just damage his case, it detonates his entire public persona. For years now, Harry has positioned himself as the man who wants the truth out, the one who said the media lied, the one who wrote a memoir promising raw honesty, the one who stood on global stages talking about transparency and accountability. He built a post-royal identity around being the whistleblower prince, and now a witness is telling a British court that he may have played fast and loose with the very truth he claims to worship. The irony is almost cinematic. If a screenwriter pitched this plot twist, executives would say it was too obvious, too poetic, too perfect. But reality doesn't care about subtlety, because the witness testimony is only the first crack. What makes this more dangerous for Harry is what he himself has already said under oath, especially when lawyers started circling around a mysterious alias that sent a visible ripple through the courtroom. Mr. Mischief, that's the name that reportedly came up. And when Harry was asked directly whether he had used that pseudonym in communications connected to the very media ecosystem he's now suing, his response wasn't a clean yes or no. It was fog, it was uncertainty, it was I don't recall. Now, memory is a tricky thing until it's not, because this is the same man who has demonstrated razor-sharp recall when recounting childhood slights, private conversations from decades ago, and deeply personal family moments in extraordinary detail. Whole chapters of memory crystal clear. But when it comes to messages that could complicate his legal narrative, suddenly things get hazy. Courtroom veterans will tell you, selective memory under oath is one of the oldest red flags in the book. It's not technically an admission of lying, but it makes every other answer wobble. And here's the key point legal watchers keep hammering. Defense lawyers don't randomly throw out specific aliases in high-stakes litigation. They ask because they believe they have evidence. They ask because they think receipts exist somewhere. Otherwise, it's a reckless gamble, especially against the prince. So if proof emerges that Harry used back channels or pseudonyms while publicly presenting himself as purely a victim of press intrusion, the narrative flips again. The man who says he was hunted by the media starts looking like someone who knew exactly how the game worked, and maybe played it too. But wait, because the courtroom drama doesn't stop there. A resurfaced text message from 2018 is casting an even darker shadow over Harry's relationship with the truth. In that message, reportedly sent to his then private secretary, Harry discussed sharing information with the authors of a highly flattering biography about him and Meghan. Publicly, at the time, the couple insisted they had nothing to do with the book. They denied cooperation. They implied distance. Privately, according to court disclosures, Harry's message focused on making sure they could say they weren't involved. That distinction is explosive. Not we had nothing to do with it, but we need to be able to say we had nothing to do with it. Legal experts call that establishing a pattern, a method, communicate through third parties, shape narratives behind the scenes, maintain public deniability. It doesn't prove courtroom fraud, but it paints a picture of someone deeply aware of how to manage optics while distancing himself from the paper trail. And once a judge or jury starts seeing patterns, every previous statement gets re-examined under a harsher light. Harry's supporters argue he's a trauma survivor fighting a ruthless press. His critics argue he's a media-savvy operator who cries foul while playing the same game. This witness testimony pours gasoline on that second interpretation, because now it's not just about whether newspapers behaved badly decades ago. It's about whether the man accusing them of wrongdoing has been completely honest with the court that's supposed to deliver justice. And if that trust erodes, even slightly, Harry's entire case becomes fragile. Courts can forgive emotional testimony. They can forgive imperfect memory. What they struggle to forgive is the sense that someone tried to manipulate the process itself. Right now, the prince stands at a crossroads he probably never imagined when he launched this legal crusade. He expected to battle tabloids. He expected to relive painful headlines. He expected sympathy. What he may not have expected was to face whispers in legal circles, in media backrooms, and public debate that he could end up fighting not just for his reputation, but for his credibility under oath. And once that question enters the room, it never really leaves. And here's where the temperature in that courtroom story goes from hot to radioactive. Because once doubts creep in about a plaintiff's honesty, everything else they've ever said in that witness box gets dragged back under the microscope. Not gently, not politely, ruthlessly. Every claim, every date, every emotional recollection, every confident accusation against the press, all of it starts to carry a silent asterisk if true. That's the nightmare scenario for Harry. He walked into this legal war banking on moral authority, the wounded son, the grieving husband, the man who said the system failed his mother and then failed his wife. That emotional weight has always been his armor. It's what made people instinctively side with him before they ever read a legal brief. But courts don't run on vibes. They run on credibility. And credibility, once cracked, doesn't just chip, it shatters. If a judge begins to suspect that a witness may have been less than fully transparent, the legal consequences can be brutal even without a criminal charge. Testimony can be given less weight. Claims can be dismissed more easily. Opposing lawyers get free rein to hammer away at inconsistencies. What was once a sympathetic narrative starts to look like a carefully curated performance. And that's exactly what critics are now whispering, that Harry's case risks morphing from a crusade for justice into a case study in overreach. Because remember, this lawsuit isn't small. It stretches back decades. It covers alleged phone hacking, unlawful information gathering, and a long list of grievances against powerful media groups. It was supposed to be historic, a prince standing up to the press, a reckoning. But if the court starts questioning whether the man at the center of it has been completely straight, the focus shifts. Suddenly, it's not just did the tabloids break the law, it becomes has the court itself been misled? That is a disaster zone for any litigant, but especially for one who has spent years branding himself as the voice of truth. And hovering over all of this is another uncomfortable reality. Harry is no ordinary claimant. He's not just a private citizen with a complaint. He's a globally famous royal figure whose words echo far beyond the courtroom walls. Every statement he makes is dissected. Every inconsistency becomes a headline. Every legal wobble becomes a global debate. So when allegations surface, even unproven ones, that he may have blurred lines with evidence or memory, the reputational fallout is instant and savage. There's also the strategic angle that legal insiders can't stop talking about. When you take on massive media corporations with bottomless legal budgets, you better be spotless, impeccable, untouchable, because they will dig, they will cross-reference, they will drag every skeleton, every old message, every contradiction into the light. If there is even a hint that Harry's team overstated something, omitted something, or relied on shaky material, opposing lawyers will weaponize it with surgical precision. Not necessarily to win the moral argument, but to win the legal one. And courts don't need to prove someone is a villain, they just need to decide whether the evidence is reliable enough. That's the trap. You can be emotionally right and legally doomed at the same time. And while all this legal tension simmers, there's the parallel battle happening outside the courtroom, the war of perception. Because public sympathy has always been Harry's secret weapon. The image of a prince hounded by the press, reliving the trauma that haunted his mother, is powerful. It's human. It's relatable. But sympathy is fragile. The moment people start wondering whether they're seeing the full picture, support softens, doubt creeps in. The narrative gets messier. Was he a victim, a fighter for justice, or a savvy operator who understood media dynamics far better than he let on? Once those questions take root, they don't go away just because someone looks emotional on the courthouse steps. And make no mistake, the emotional moments matter. Tears in court make headlines, they shape tone, they influence how casual observers interpret complex legal arguments, but judges are trained to look past that. They care about documents, timelines, consistency. So while the world debates feelings, the court quietly asks a colder question. Is the story internally solid? That's why this witness testimony, whether it ultimately leads to anything formal or not, is so destabilizing. It injects doubt at the foundation. It tells the court, look again, look harder. Don't just accept the narrative at face value. And if the court does start looking harder, the ripple effects could extend far beyond this one lawsuit. Harry has other legal battles, other public claims, a memoir filled with explosive allegations, high-profile interviews where he spoke with total confidence about events and motives. If one major case gets tangled in questions of credibility, everything else he said in other arenas gets re-examined through that same skeptical lens. Fair or not, that's how public reputation works. One crack becomes a pattern. One controversy becomes a cloud. For Harry, the real fear may not be prison or fines or dramatic courtroom showdowns. It may be something quieter but just as devastating, losing the moral high ground he stood on since stepping away from royal duties. Because once the public stops seeing you as the honest truth teller and starts seeing you as just another powerful figure fighting to control a narrative, the magic fades. The speeches hit differently. The interviews feel more calculated. The story stops being about courage and starts being about strategy. Right now, everything hinges on what happens next inside that courtroom. Do these allegations fizzle out? Do they get formally examined? Does the judge address them directly? However it unfolds, the shadow is already there. And for a man who built his entire post-palace life on the promise of truth, that shadow may be the most dangerous opponent he's faced yet.